Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Two-Way. I'm Mark Halpern. Thank you for joining our special pop-up edition of The Diner. David Burrell is here with us of WIC to do something that no one else has done, which is to present qualitative and quantitative conversation and information about an amazing event that occurred yesterday. The whole world is talking about the Oval Office confrontation between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and President Zelensky. And lots of pundits and foreign policy experts and government officials are offering their opinions and their analysis about what happens and what it all means. We believe we're about to present to you the only quantitative information about how American voters are reacting to what they saw. And then, as part of the way we do the diner, where we have a poll, quantitative information. We'll also have a qualitative conversation. We'll welcome folks who are watching here on the two-way platform to become part of the conversation, to let us know what you think about it happened. We'll ask you some of the same questions you'll see in the poll. And hopefully this will give everybody more insight than available, we think, anywhere else about this extraordinary event. David Burrell is here, Wick, who is able to do polling very quickly. It's possible that no one's ever going to poll this event except for us, because by the time we get to, this happened on a Friday. Most news organizations have limited, and academic organizations have limited polling budgets. They don't have the same methodology David does, which he'll explain in a moment. And by the time we get to Monday and they go back and start having meetings and say, what should we do? The story, may well have moved on to such an extent that they don't want to gear up a poll. So we're super excited to have you here. If you're watching on the two-way platform, we'd love for you to be in the conversation. Please raise your electronic hand. We'll get to you after David reviews the poll. And if you're watching on X or on YouTube, thank you for joining. You can't be part of the conversation, although you should in the future. If you'd like to join us, go to two-way.tv and sign up to receive our notifications, or sign up for my Wide World of News Substack, and you can find out the proper way to join this way, to not just watch live, but to interact. If you're going to go in the chat here on Two-Way or on X or on YouTube, I'd ask that you follow the ethos of our platform: peace, love, and understanding, extending the presumption of grace to all. I've already heard from people when we announced the event, and I tweeted out two of the survey results. I've already heard people to say, well, your poll is not polling the right people, because that's not actually what people think. Well, people can have their own red or blue opinions about how people might have reacted or did react to the photo op and the extraordinary confrontation we saw. But this is an actual survey, 1,000 people. David, welcome. Thank you for doing this and for bringing it to the two-way community. First of all, one thing I want to make clear off the bat: the most extraordinary thing about this survey, you asked people what they thought, some questions before you showed them the video of the confrontation. And then for them to go on with the survey, they had to watch the 11 minutes, the key 11 minutes of the
Right.
confrontation. And so these are people who aren't basing it on a short clip they saw on Twitter, or what they heard about it, or read about, or saw a little bit. They saw the key 11 minutes, right? So that makes this a much different survey than most kinds.
Right. We did get public opinion, on where, and this is a survey of registered voters. So we did get a lot of public opinion on where, they stand on, Trump and Vance and Zelensky as leaders, and then also where they stand on the conflict and what they think should happen next. But what's unique about this is, all the respondents, we had 1,000 respondents. We had them watch online the entire 10 to 11 minute segment of like the key confrontation between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky. And then after they watched it, we were able to ask them questions about, how they felt about it, how they responded to it, and what their reactions were. And so, yeah, I mean, there, and again, public opinion gets shaped by the news media, gets shaped by, key influential online, but we are actually able to watch the reaction to the actual conversation and the Oval Office between them and see how people reacted when they watched the whole video.
All right, David, before you run through the survey, just again, talk to people a little bit more about methodologically. People might be surprised you were able to put together 1,000-person survey in, not much long. I forget when you went into the field, but you did this in less, about a day. So explain how you poll that allows you to do that.
Right. So, and historically, and even 10 years ago, this would not have been possible. And that's, we've been polling for 20 years now. And, because it would take so much effort to get respondents, have them watch the video, but because of technology and because of a number of the other advancements in the polling industry, we are able to recruit people based on these panels. So, hundreds of thousands of people on these panels, and they are paid to take these surveys, but we do get representative samples from it, and we expose them to the videos, and they watch the entire 10-minute video prior to answering the rest of the questions.
How do you know that there aren't too many Republicans or too many Democrats in this survey?
Well, we still continue. It's all representative, so we continue to make sure that the the percentage of Republicans and Democrats that take the survey are representative of the number of or the percentage of Republicans and Democrats that voted in the last election. So we're still controlling for that, and it's still very accurate. I mean, this
Okay.
is how most of the big most of the major players, a lot of the surveys you see online right now are doing it.
Right. Okay. So David's going to run through it. Again, this is 1,000 American registered voters. Some of the questions they answered before they had watched the 11-minute video, and then they could only go forward with the survey after watching the video. Now, of course, they could have put it on mute or read a book or whatever, but presumably most of them actually
Right.
watched the exchange. So, David, go ahead, share your screen and run people through the questions.
All right, great. Hold on. Okay, Mark, you see on the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's run through it. All right, so let's go through the first part of this. And this is where, prior to watching the video of that, incredible exchange between Trump and Zelensky and Vance, we asked registered voters some baseline questions about the key figures that, were in the room and some other ones, and then also on the conflict in general. So, what we found out prior to them watching the video was, generally speaking, America thinks that Ukraine needs to negotiate an end to the war. So, when they were asked to choose between continuing fighting till they win the war and negotiating an end to the war as soon as possible, 55.1% said negotiating an end to the war, and only 30.8% said they continue fighting till they win. And again, this is all relevant once we actually get into the response when they actually watch the video. So America also agreed that Ukraine would need to make some territorial concessions in order to end the war, with 50% saying they should. They agree. Americans agree that they should, and then also 30.9% saying that they disagreed. And so 19.1 did say that they were not sure. So moving on, and again, this is all prior to watching the video, but Zelensky's image, I think this is very important as we get into the next section here. So Zelensky's image rating is higher than Trump, Vance, or Biden. So when you look at the amount of people that have a favorable or somewhat favorable opinion of him versus those that have a unfavorable, somewhat or very unfavorable, his opinion is rating is much higher than Trump, Vance, Biden, and certainly much higher than Putin. So when we look at the people who are about to watch this video that we're exposing them to, the whole 10-minute clip, this is not a pro-Russia audience. This is not a, pro-Trump audience. This is just, registered Americans and where they are on the issues right now.
And again,
So-
the light and the dark green represent the favorable. The
Mhm.
light and dark orange represent the negative. So you can see Zelensky is the most popular of the people you tested, more popular than Putin, Trump, Vance, and Joe Biden, and by a decent amount. And you can see, Trump is a little more favorable than Vance, but as you pointed out, people don't have a high negative view of Zelensky.
Right. And I think that if you looked at the bottom three rows here, this is very consistent. We did this survey obviously very fast, as you pointed out earlier. This is very consistent with everyone's reporting on a national level. So you
Yeah,
really got to look at the top two rows here and see the contrast between one, Zelensky and Putin, but also the contrast between Zelensky and all the other American leaders. Like this is, we're not going into a situation where this is a very pro-Russia or pro anything
right,
Republican audience. So,
right,
so there's some interesting insights that are going to come from this.
right. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so these are the questions that were asked from the audience, including a couple others, prior to exposing them to that 10-minute video, right? So the next thing we did was we said, hey, we made every person in the survey, they had to watch the entire 10 to 11-minute video, and we asked them questions about it. So the first thing we asked was, do you approve? How, I mean, at what level do you approve or disapprove of Trump, Vance, and Zelensky and how they handled themselves in the meeting? And so this actually measures, very similar to what you kind of saw in the favorability question prior to the video, that Zelensky actually was uh, his net approval for how he handled himself in that meeting was higher. Um, but as we move forward and we ask more specifics about, for example, one of the big conflicts in the video, and they had just watched this video, right? One of the conflicts between the parties was that Trump and Vance argued for compromise and diplomacy with Russia to end the war, and Zelensky, on the other hand, made these points that there is not room for compromise and questioned diplomacy based on the history of trying to do diplomacy with Russia. So, this is right after they've watched the video, and we ask, which side do you think had the stronger argument in this part of that video, that clip? And obviously, you can see that the registered voters who answered the survey said that Trump and Vance had a stronger argument in that. So moving on to one of the other key moments in the clip that they all just had watched was President Trump took offense, I mean, as everyone saw in the video, when Zelensky made the point that America has a big ocean between it and this conflict, but America would eventually feel it in the future. And obviously, Trump and Vance took offense to that. And so we asked America after they had watched that part of the video, what did they think? And 62%, at least 60% said it was at least slightly, somewhat, or very offensive. And only 37.7% said it was not at all offensive.
Significant because, again, as we've said, they have a largely favorable Zelensky,
Yes.
and yet they still found that he was offensive.
Right. I think this is interesting, and I'd love to hear Dan and Sean talk about this on Monday. It's just this thing is these real events are happening that people are watching, and sometimes the reaction to it is not really following on the party lines that you would expect it to. So moving on to the next one, we did ask, among many other things, Mark, that we can put out later, is we ask, after watching the video, did you think that Trump and Vance seem authentic in their desire for peace? And 49.3% said yes, and 41.5% said no. When that does track a little bit more favorably than Trump and Vance's general image amongst the American voting public. So I do think that that's important when you look at this key moment that happened and how the America responded, to Trump and Vance in this. I think this is, it's only 8 points, but it does matter because typically things are much more divisive and right on party lines. And again, this is from an audience that is not certainly not pro-Russia or pro-Trump. They actually had a more favorable opinion of Zelensky and probably Ukraine than any other figure we're measuring. So this is one we asked also at the end of it, and it says, who has the negotiation leverage concerning the future of the conflict? So the actual question was, generally speaking, who do you think has the most negotiating leverage in the relationship between Ukraine and the United States concerning the future of the Ukraine-Russia conflict? And this is a pretty loud number here. So there's not many people who are watching this interaction and think that Ukraine is in a position of power in that Oval Meeting office, is what I would take from this slide here. So last thing, Mark, and we'll wrap it up, is after we asked those questions, we exposed the survey respondents and asked them to read Donald Trump's statement, his official statement that he tweeted out, or he sent out on Truth, I guess. And we asked, how did you feel, how would you rate his statement after this Oval Meeting? And obviously, you can read the statement there. And I do think that there's some pretty loud numbers here that it was not very negative. So this is, as much as people may read on it, and we'll figure out how public opinion reacts to this later on. But what we're looking at here, Mark, is we're looking at when people actually watch this interaction between all of them and they look at this tweet, how are real Americans, reacting to it if they actually get to see it. And you can see right here, there are some pretty loud numbers there.
Yeah. So, David, I don't know if you can go back about 6 slides, but with the exception of the question of how people handled themselves, where Zelensky did okay, I think it's maybe one more back. Is this one?
Yep.
How they handled themselves. So Zelensky does pretty well here, right? but this is really the only question about sort of asking people to choose between Trump and Zelensky, where he does better.
Mhm.
I don't find it to be in conflict with the other answers. I handled themselves in the meeting. He handled himself. He was kind of it was an away game for him. So I think people may be saying, well, he was in a difficult situation. But again, just go through the slides again, and we'll just summarize here one by one. Um, so,
Yeah, yeah, I think we
so
can start here. Actually, it's a good place to start
yeah,
because again, we start out with I mean, again, America is largely, much more pro-Ukraine, as you can see here. I mean, by virtue of the fact that we're looking at the leaders of Ukraine and Russia, than they are Russia, and even they have a higher opinion rating of Zelensky than they do have any American leaders.
right,
And so this is that kind of sets the stage for the audience here. And I think that you can split things up into two categories is, the fact that maybe Zelensky may have lost on his points, maybe lost on the facts or on the issues that he was arguing, it doesn't mean that he presented himself as egregious as maybe some of the media's. I'm not trying to put words in the media's mouth, but like maybe, that narrative is not quite accurate. And I think that's
right.
a big point for this slide here. Like people actually don't think he was, you know, uh, too egregious or too confrontational or too, um, you
Yeah.
know,
And yet going forward, just take through them one by one. We'll just summarize them. So people think that the president of the United States has a stronger argument on the diplomacy questions,
right.
right? Right. So that's
Right. So
number
that was a big
one.
part of the conflict. And, and
Yeah.
again, they had just watched that. They had just watched the
Right.
whole thing. When they were
Right.
asked about that, they generally said, yeah, no, they won on the points there.
Right. Okay. So
And
next is, was he offensive? Yes, they did think he was offensive. And again, that's the point of view of MAGA. That's the point of view of the president and his team. Not necessarily the point of view of Europeans, maybe. But
right.
so again, Zelensky comes out on the short end here. Next.
It's like,
Uh, Again, they credit the president and the vice president for being authentic in their desire for peace, something Zelensky may or may not agree with, but it's certainly that's another positive for the president. Next, again, overwhelmingly belief that the U.S. side has more leverage in the negotiating on the conflict. Next, and very favorable view of the president's statement that he put out afterwards, kind of putting his gloss on what happened. So, um, uh, a couple things, David. You can take the screen down for now, at least, if
yep.
that's all right. So, my friend Michael Smerconish, on both his radio show and on his TV show, does what he calls a daily poll. And anyone who knows me and Michael knows I have huge respect for Michael, but Michael would tell you it's not a poll; it's a survey. I wish he didn't call it a poll. It's not scientific. And some people I've seen in the chat are asking, and someone texted me, Michael's survey overwhelmingly favored Zelensky. Um, and the question was, uh, who bears the responsibility for what happened? And according to the survey that Michael did, 54,000 people said Trump. 50% of the people, which is 54,000 votes, said Trump. 41% said Vance, and only 4% said Zelensky. Now, unfortunately, I believe that means the people who watch Michael's CNN show are very anti-Trump, because those numbers don't make any sense, and they don't match up at all with what's here. So
Yeah.
Michael does his surveys, and they're very popular, and I think he's genius to do them. But I don't think you can say that survey is of the same rigor and quantitative value as what David has just shared with you. Okay.
Right. And I think that, that would be just to put it on the other foot there. It's equivalent of if Tucker Carlson sent a survey to his subscribers, effectively or his followers on Twitter or X, and got the responses back from the same question, it would be dramatically different than Michael's. And so, but this is random sampling of the American public, and I think it's gonna be really, it's a great representation of how if you were able to let every American watch that actual interaction, which we know they didn't, they're going to get it through news and media. How would they have responded? And so I think we learned a lot about it.
Yep. Again, any American who's asked to spend the 10 minutes watching it, 10 and a half minutes or so, they're going to have a more informed view of the thing. So Time for your questions. Again, if you'd like to be on the conversation, you're here on two-way, please raise your hand. As always, tell us where you're from, what's on your mind, and I'd love for you to address some of the same issues, if you can, that were asked about in the WIC survey. So just appraise questions like was President Zelensky offensive? Who has the upper hand in the negotiations, who presented the stronger argument, etc. As much as you'd like to address those same questions, we'd love to hear
And
from you.
Mark,
So,
there were other questions we asked too. So if people
yeah,
bring them up in the chat
yeah,
here and we talk
yeah,
about it, then
yeah,
we'll let y'all know what
yeah,
the data
and
showed.
and when we're done here, you'll get a link to the video as you always do. I'll also send around in my Substack, and I'll link to it on Twitter. The full survey. So the slides you saw plus some others, the full thing will be available to you, so you can look through it. All right. Time for your comments, questions, etc. Peter, welcome in. Unmute yourself if you would. Tell us where you are and what's on your mind, please, regarding the Oval Office
All right.
situation.
Well, wow. Well, good evening to you all. Kudos, of course, to this podcast. Mark, you're the best. Mr. Burrell, hey, this is very fascinating, and I have a million things I want to say. You want to know about me? Okay, calling you or coming you from. I've been on once before in the morning. I'm a retired. I'm an attorney, but I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army. I did a combat tour in Iraq in 2008. I bring that up because I used to be the most neocon of neocons, but after my combat tour in Iraq became, dramatically not a neocon. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge Trump supporter. So that's why I bring that up. And so I guess the one thing I would say is I think John Podhoretz is on the call, isn't he? I
He
listened to
is.
his emergency. I'm huge fan of his and a supporter. I mean, great respect for him. Obviously, I don't agree with his perspective on the Ukraine war, or not obviously, but I don't. There, there is the infamous Doctor or the famous Dr. P.
I wish I were doctor.
I know.
I
I'm
would
saying that.
prescribe you something if I were a doctor.
Okay. Well, I guess the thing I was going to say, a couple of things, and I was going to bring up what you brought up yesterday. One, in fairness, and I don't want to demonize Zelensky, but one thing that John brought up is I think maybe he was not treating himself very well because he was speaking in a second language, right? And that may be why he particularly said things that offended the president and the vice president. The other thing is, I think John, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but he would say that he was sort of very critical of Vice President Vance. I guess the one thing I would say, and again, I listened to yours yesterday, Mark, with your dad, was it yes, with your dad, right? And people came on and said, not only I listened to all 11 minutes, but people went on and said they'd seen the whole 40 minutes or whatever, and people said that were defending Vice President Vance, saying Zelensky was being kind of his body language was pretty nasty during the entire event, and then that's one of the reasons why maybe Vice President Vance went off on him. And so I guess John would think that maybe Vice President Vance went into this to deliberately bait him. But didn't your dad say, John, I mean, Mark, didn't your dad say that he thought that that President Zelensky went into this to deliberately sort of torpedo the event because he didn't want to do the deal. Isn't that what your dad said yesterday?
No, my dad said keying off of something Trump said, although my father takes Trump way too literally, as far as I'm
Right.
concerned. He said President Trump said, we let the cameras in here because we wanted everybody to see, how this guy was behaving, basically. Um, so I don't know that we know sort of at this point with any definitiveness sort of what everybody's intentions were going in, or whether either side executed a plan, or whether it all just happened in an ad hoc way. I don't think we know.
Okay.
Peter, just let me ask you though, do you think President Zelensky behaved appropriately or not?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think he behaved I mean, I guess this is what, and again, I've read a ton of wasted a ton of day reading a ton of stuff today about the event, right? And so I guess what I would say is somebody in somebody on one of the left-wing papers pointed out, Keir Starmer, right, Prime Minister, Labor leader, was here earlier this week, pretty much could guarantee, I think we would all agree, probably not a big fan of Donald Trump's, but he went into his meeting and could not have been more diplomatic, right, with Trump, and basically smoothed over and got what he wanted out of Trump, out of President Trump, by using diplomacy and being maybe almost obsequious to President Trump. And Zelensky did not take that approach, and he just didn't do his cause any good,
Right.
right? You
David,
know,
I mean,
John, hold on one second. I just want to see
yeah,
if David
sure.
has any questions for Peter.
Well, I know. I thought, one of the questions I was thinking about as Peter was talking was, you know, obviously, to Mark's question of if he thought that Zelensky did himself any favors, you seem to have a background of knowledge about what happened even prior to this Oval Meeting office, and maybe whether you read about it before or after. There was a lot that happened before and after this conflict. If you had to watched it just not knowing anything, and you just watched that kind of 10-minute interchange, would you have thought that Zelensky handled himself poorly, or would you have thought that it was appropriate?
I would have said that Zelensky did not handle himself well, but I don't think that, I'm not sort of the hard MAGA Crow who thinks he was, absolutely awful, right? And I can appreciate that, his country is at war. It's more
Yeah,
complicated than I think people make it out to be, but his country was invaded. I don't have any illusions about
yeah,
Vladimir Putin, right? And
right.
so his country was invaded and he was under a lot of pressure. But he
I think one of the chasms or one of the interesting things about the survey that we saw was, you know, even though on the facts or on the points, America did actually side with Trump and Vance more, they didn't think Zelensky handled himself poorly. And again, that can be up for debate for anyone who watches the video or knows what happened before or after. And that and then also they do have a relatively favorable opinion of him. So I think it's interesting, so that's why I was asking, and I appreciate your perspective on it.
Yeah. Peter, thanks for coming in. We're very grateful to you. Thank you. John, thanks for joining. We'd love to hear what
Sure.
you think of the survey or of the events
I
or
find
anything.
the survey is fascinating because I think as David points out, the data don't agree exactly in a way that you would expect. And so the Zelensky favorable opinion after 60% of people say that he was disrespectful and that sort of thing, that's not exactly what you would anticipate. You would think that the answers would kind of harmonize along the lines of favorable, unfavorable, who did badly, who did well. Trump's statement, unbelievably aggressive statement, afterwards on Twitter and True Social, throwing him out of the White House and saying, come back when you want peace, viewed very favorably, while people still view Zelensky favorably. So what that says to me is we're in one of these places where people are being asked a question about a topic that they really don't care that much about, and that their views are, yeah, Trump was right, he was disrespectful, but you know what, he seems to be an okay guy. And yeah, Trump was right to say come back when you want peace. Trump wants peace, but Zelensky's got a lot to go say for himself, like that. It's sort of like people like us who have been hardened into place in a very serious ideological conflict, particularly intra-right conflict, we are in our trenches, right? And then you're going and talking to people who aren't in the trenches, and they're sort of looking at this almost like a boxing match or a baseball game. It's sort of like, yeah, I mean, Trump won, but Zelensky gave it a good shot. It's sort of like that. And so I think what's interesting about it is, just as I think that the what happened here, though, was unprecedented and therefore kind of jaw-dropping and, you know, changes the terms of what diplomacy means in the 21st century. What policy implications it has remain completely up for grabs. Clearly, Trump is looking for a way to stop spending money in Iraq. Vance is a representative of a position in the Republican Party that says that we made a mistake, Ukraine, that we made a mistake even aligning with Ukraine. We shouldn't be aligned with Ukraine. And now his people and he, in some ways, are taking a victory lap because I think Zelensky kind of fell into a trap or because he was facing two people who are not actually sympathetic to him. And it's been a long time since Zelensky has had a conversation with any human being on this planet who is not sympathetic to him. And
Yep.
he did not know how to parry. And he was speaking in a language in which he is not fluent. It's not only that he isn't a native English speaker, he's not entirely fluent in English. And
Right.
I just want to point out one thing, and then I'm going to shut up. It all depends on whose ox is being gored. In 2011, Bibi, or 2010, Bibi Netanyahu came to the White House, had a joint press appearance with Obama, in which and they talked about how they'd had this meeting. And Bibi said, and I told Obama this, I told Obama that, I said this to you, Mr. President. I think we agree on that. We agree on the other thing. I want this. And Obama was furious. He hated Bibi from that moment forward. And anytime Bibi did anything from that moment until Obama left office, the general line among Democrats was that Netanyahu was incredibly disrespectful of Obama, personally disrespectful. This is clearly a trigger. This is kind of a political trigger for leaders. They don't like to have these contentious meetings. You're supposed to come to the president and say we're all on the same page, and the president says we're all on the same, and everybody smiles. And Zelensky didn't do that the way Bibi didn't do that. If you were me and you were supporting Bibi and you didn't like Obama, that was fine with you, right? But if you were a Democrat, you didn't like the way Bibi behaved and you never forgave him. And I think this is a similar kind of dynamic, that it really does matter where you were before the meeting took
Yep.
place and where you are on the ideological spectrum. And if you're not there, particularly, it's not going to stick.
Super, super interesting, John. Thank you. Stay with us. Janine, welcome in. Comment, tell us
Hi.
first where you are, then what's on your mind, and John, hopefully you can direct questions to John, to David, to me, or just tell us again what you think about what happened in the Oval.
Okay, thank you for having me, and thank you for this platform. I enjoy these conversations so much.
Great, thank you.
I'm in Long Island, New York. I'm in Long Island, New York. I am actually, I mean, what is done is done, and I'm hoping that the fallout of all of this isn't as bad as I think it might be. I saw something today where there is a Norway company that is now refusing to provide fuel to I guess, American military ships. And they put out a statement. I saw it online today. And I saw all the statements of the European leaders who are, condemning Vance and Trump for their behavior. And it just feels like the global fallout might be worse than we think.
Yeah, that's possible. That's very possible. As John said, we really don't know what the implications are yet. Well, Janine, what did you think of what happened in the Oval Office in terms of culpability, in terms of arguments?
So I did watch the whole thing, and I do think that um, that Zelensky was the agitator. I feel like he was trying to have a conversation that should have happened behind closed doors, and it ended up in front of the media. And I think that that was not proper and not really respectful. I understand him needing to have that conversation and get his thoughts and feelings out there to President Trump, but I don't think he should have chosen that time to do it.
Great. David or John, any
But
questions?
I
Go
just
ahead.
want to point out, because another background detail. I read today, it's from one of the books about might be Woodward's, or it might be uh, Foer's book about Biden, that he had a conversation with Zelensky in the summer of 2022, in which he said, you could be a little more grateful to me for everything I'm doing for you. But it was a private conversation on the telephone. Zelensky, I would just say, to be fair to Zelensky, if you don't have to be, but this wasn't supposed to be the press conference. They were going to have a press conference at 4. Trump turned this moment, which is Mark knows I can't remember what the term is, where you bring the press in to take the photographs of the meeting. Then the press is supposed to leave. You know, classically, the press leaves, having taken the photograph of them in the chairs, and the press leaves, and then they have a private conversation. Trump, who is now doing everything differently from the way anybody has ever done it, kept the press in the room. And so the conversation then proceeded in public. Zelensky made a huge mistake not being anodyne and toothless in that conversation, but he wasn't prepared, clearly was not prepared for the fact that they were having a big public forum
Yeah.
discussion. He hadn't been briefed for it.
Yep.
They were going to finish this. He was probably going to have an hour and a half of briefing for the press conference in the room that he went into when they ended the catastrophe. And so that was new. That's like something new. We've never, that doesn't happen. Like sometimes
Yeah.
people ask two questions at that. What is it called? The spray? It's not a spray. What is it? Is it
Pool,
spray?
pool spray photo op.
Pool spray. Okay. So there was a pool spray. It was supposed to be 5 minutes long and ended up being 57 minutes long. You
Yeah.
know, and so he wasn't in the right frame of mind, obviously, clearly.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
David, we're happy if any of the Burrell children show up, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, no, he's actually my 9-year-old trying to help me get my charger
Yeah.
from my computer. So
All right. David, do you have any questions for Janine you'd
no,
like to ask?
well, I had a comment. I think that anything else, I mean, I'd love for people to respond to this is, you know what, I don't like this whole, although I do think it's the reason why people are talking about this 80-20 concept, that the Republicans are on the 80 side and the Democrats are on the 20 side is interesting. I think it's very inaccurate. But I do think it's a very interesting concept. And you know, and I like to look at the data. If anything, there are a couple slides that we showed today that was not 80-20. Nothing's, you know, I mean, although that
Right.
almost 80% of America thinks that the United States has the leverage over Ukraine on any negotiation, from a standpoint of who's leading negotiations, that was a loud number. But
Yeah.
it's not 80-20.
Yeah.
It's much more, and I thought there was some very interesting insights from this on the fact that, you know, there's a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats that thought that Vance and Trump handled themselves well.
Yeah.
And this, obviously all Republicans did. And I think that that's one thing that we should be looking at here. And because I do feel like as we continue to look at these issues, these key conflicts, that's what everyone has to look at. It's like, hey, you know, how many Democrats or how many independents are actually thinking that Trump or Vance handled themselves well? I think we're
Yep.
seeing that in
Right.
this as well.
Yep. Janine, thank you for joining. Grateful to you. I'm going to bring a few people in at once, and just kind of hopefully create a little bit of a conversation. And Ben, as I bring others in, just tell folks where you're calling us from tonight.
Hey, I'm calling from Westchester, New York.
Okay. And Bill, same question. Where are you calling from tonight? You need to unmute Bill.
Montana Democrat.
Yes, sir. And James, where are you calling from? Got to unmute James one more time.
Sorry, James. I'm calling from West Hartford, Connecticut.
All right. Staying in the Northeast. Ben, you first. Tell us what you thought of what happened in the Oval Office.
Yeah, I was really confused by the whole thing, especially by Zelensky and what his motivations were going into it. But to me, how it seemed was, you know, this had been going on against the background of the negotiations of the mineral deal. And what it kind of made me aware of was the way in which the US and the Ukraine seem to be pretty far from each other in terms of their positions. And I was just so perplexed by why Zelensky thought it was appropriate I thought that JD Vance's comment about like airing your dirty laundry out in front of the American media seemed quite apt to me, because it just showed, you know, the raw the mineral deal is happening against the larger structure of the peace deal. It's this preparatory step that's supposed to precede the actual talks between the Ukraine and Russia and the US. And it just seemed that yeah, he was showing his. Sorry, I'm kind of losing
Yeah,
it.
that's right. Ben, are you a Trump supporter, Ben?
Uh, I suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Bill is not a Trump supporter. Bill, what did you think about what happened in the Oval?
I had a visceral reaction when I was watching it. It just, my heart was kind of sinking as the conversation was going on. Um, I I thought the comments from JD about going to campaign with the Democrats in Pennsylvania, Trump talking about how he's gone through all this hardship with Putin because of all the Russia hoax. Um, I just thought it was so. And my impression of the situation was it was a setup. And I worked with these high net worth developers, kind of in the 100 million plus range. And when they don't like a deal or they want to tank a deal, they can get very nasty and they can go very hard to just tank it. And it seemed like the handoff, one last question, and then the seamless handoff to JD seemed like it was a setup to our last thing we're going to do at this press conference is we're going to go after Zelensky and try to get him into a debate. So I was watching it as thinking of a developer, Trump, who maybe didn't think this mineral deal was that great and he wanted an out, and here was his out. So that was my reaction. I had one technical question. Was there a margin of error on the polling?
David, for some
Yeah,
reason,
the
go ahead.
confidence interval will be about 3.5, 4%.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things we try to do, especially when we're doing really quick response polling, is make sure we only report really loud numbers, and loud insights from it. So, there certainly is a margin of error on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to say about polls are not predictions. Sometimes polls are off. Right. We're not saying this is like gospel, but it is 1,000-person survey, which is bigger than most polls you'll see. They did watch the video,
So
and
it's
it
the entire
is
10, 11-minute video. And so
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a reaction. Public opinion will change dramatically over the next few days as everyone gets fed the spin and the narratives through X and then and the
Yeah, definitely have a bias because I was thinking of developer as I'm watching it, I'm thinking of Trump as a negotiator developer. So my bias is when I saw that seamless handoff is
Yeah.
they're going to tank this. So
Bill, is there any degree to which you find fault with how Zelensky handled it?
well, I guess compared to how the British and the French did, if you look at them as the model of how you're supposed to, be extremely deferential to Trump, yeah, he didn't play that role. I don't think wearing a suit or not, I think that's just a smokescreen. I don't think that was an issue. And he shouldn't have taken the bait from JD, but in the end, I don't know that would have really been mattered. I think they were going to tank it anyway.
Yeah.
So I think he was done the minute he got to the meeting, and this was just a way for them to grandstand and make it a public execution of the deal.
Bill, thank you. James, what's your perspective on what happened in the Oval Office?
So first, three-time Trump voter, but moderate guy. So I thought it was so on the first of all, on the polling, I line up exactly how that poll looked. I would have fallen in the major categories of that poll. And I do think, to John's point, I do give Zelensky a little bit of grace, because he was in a tough situation, second language, and I can't imagine what he's going through. That said, there's a couple of things. I think it was a terrible unforced error by the president and the vice president. And so now rather than talking about a winning streak, we are now talking about this and the capabilities to be statesmen. I think that was an unforced error. Mark, to your point about JD Vance, what was most interesting to me in watching the video was the part where Trump really got angry was when Zelensky said to JD Vance, "Stop yelling at me," and Trump jumped on him quickly after that point and sort of took over the conversation. And so this is just such a unique thing, I think, for a vice president to be this in the middle of things, and so out front. And so there's, I think, a couple of points. One thing, I thought JD Zelensky came at him with a comment about, have you ever been to Ukraine? And you could see JD Vance, it caught JD Vance, but you could watch JD Vance pull that thing back in and turn the conversation back in the direction that he wanted to, which I thought was an outstanding display of poise and intellect at the time he was doing it. And the other thing, it seems like, and this is maybe way off topic, but it seems to me that JD Vance is right now the spiritual heir to the MAGA movement. And I understand, like 39 days in, but it is pretty clear that there is something there with the vice president. And this is a question actually to Mark or John, maybe. Is it unusual when a head of state is talking to a head of state to have the vice president sort of be in that conversation? And could that be taken as a disrespectful act? I don't know, but that's what I think.
Not unusual for them to be in the room, but unusual for them to speak, and maybe in my recollection, John may differ. Unprecedented for them to play. Yeah, well, they all, yeah.
I mean, Hegseth was in the room.
Rubio, yeah.
It was a bit weird.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, I don't remember a vice president ever speaking. I mean, Cheney was certainly in the room. I think Kamala was almost never in the room.
No, she was in the room a lot, actually.
Oh, she was. Okay. So
that's all right. Gore was in the room.
Right.
I mean, Joe Biden made a point of including her in a lot of stuff.
But remember, Trump likes to have other people speak in his meetings. He actually calls.
I have to say I don't like when people jump to conclusions about things, including whether there was a Trump-Vance plan here to blow the thing up. I think reporting is good, but I think speculating is not necessarily helpful and not good. I do find it strange, as much as Vance has already won over Trump and has a lot of leeway, and he's spoken at other things where you don't normally see vice presidents speak. I would be surprised if he spoke with no prior discussion. Maybe he did. I don't want to say he definitely did. There was prior discussion, but it would be quite something if he chose to play that role without some sort of prior approval, because it was quite a role, right? I mean, you could argue whether you think what Vance said was inappropriate or not. I think a lot of people have already said Vance's role set this off. What Vance said, whether you blame him for it or say what he said was fine, but Zelensky reacted to it, that's what set these things off. And so if it wasn't done with some sort of permission, and maybe I saw one camera angle where it seemed almost as if before he started, he looked to Trump for approval. Yeah. And again, so, but even it's hard to believe it was just based on that look, because that was quite a role he played. Well, hopefully we'll learn more. James, Ben, and Bill, thank you all for coming in. I'm very grateful to you for making time on a Saturday to be part of the conversation. All right, I'm just going to toggle here very quickly. Diane, tell folks who don't know. I'm bringing several of you at once. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind. Wait for just a second, but just tell folks where you are.
From Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Okay. And Patty has been here regularly of late, but Patty, for folks who don't know, tell folks where you were calling from. Oops, sorry, you got to unmute, Patty. There you go.
Thank you. I'm in Southwest Michigan.
Okay. And Eric, thank you for coming in. Tell folks who don't know where you are.
Hey, Mark, I'm Eric Stratton. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, thank you. Diane, you first. Tell us what your main thoughts are about what happened in the Oval Office.
Well, the main takeaway for me, which I don't know if I'm missing it, but it seems like it's not being discussed, is that the vice president brought up that conscripts forced to the front lines. And I do stuff like that about on X, but I haven't really heard the media talking about that. And it seems like something that would be really important to the American public to know if that's okay. And it seemed like Zelensky acknowledged that.
Yeah, John, what do you have to say, or what do you know about that?
So a big talking point on the part of people who are trying essentially to separate America from Ukraine is that there is conscription, that people are being forced to fight and that they're very young. And I don't know that much, but yes, there is a war. The country's at war, and there is universal conscription, and they are conscripting teenagers. And we conscripted teenagers in World War II, and
Yeah,
countries conscript. What that? That's actually
I
correct.
think we're the generation that we're dealing with now. I just don't think that that would be considered acceptable to
If we were in the middle of okay,
but we're not
countries
in
across.
world.
Okay,
There-
we're not Ukraine. We weren't invaded by another
Yeah.
country that sent 400,000 people into our land. So how are you going to fight a war? Israel has universal conscription. Switzerland has universal conscription. Switzerland, which has not actually fought in a war in 350 years, has universal conscription. We don't. We are lucky. We don't have to have universal conscription. We
Yeah.
did have universal conscription in with some so the thing about the complaint is that they're taking boy soldiers, meaning they're conscripting kids at the age of 13 and 14. That I believe is not true, and that
Well,
would be horrifying. But I'm just telling you, like,
no,
objecting to the notion that a nation at war is
that
conscripting youth is
Ahistorical.
I mean, there is
Yeah.
no other way to fight
Yeah.
a war on your own territory than to
Yeah.
conscript
Okay.
people.
Diane, real quick follow, then I want to make a point and then go to Patty. That's okay. Don't
it
no reason to
seems
say.
like they're running out of people to fight the war, and there might be a time to talk about whether they have lost this war.
Yeah. Another thing Vance said, which is something I've heard in other quarters, but I don't believe I've heard Vance say it, at least not as vice president. And maybe some of you would tell me this has gotten a lot of attention. He said part of why he suggested part of why he hasn't gone to Ukraine is that because when Zelensky gives American politicians tours, they're propaganda tours. They're not an accurate reflection of what's going on. That's a pretty serious charge to make against Zelensky, right? To say, and to some extent against his colleagues, to say you all have gone, you members of Congress have gone to Ukraine on these CODELs, but you're not getting the true picture about what's happening because Zelensky is giving you misleading tours. That's a pretty serious accusation. Patty,
Yeah.
what did you think of what happened?
I was watching it live, and my first impression when everything was happening was that Trump was facing forward, Vance was facing Zelensky, and as things got more heated, he could see Zelensky's reactions, and that was why he spoke up. That was just my immediate
Interesting.
when
Interesting.
I was
Yeah, super interesting.
I think that
Eric,
dynamic's right. Yeah.
yeah, Eric, what were your thoughts?
First off, I've been here since end of June, beginning of July last year. Absolutely love it. Found the commentary pod through here. So, John, I watch you guys every day.
Thank
Watch
you.
both shows every day. Love you guys. This is the best format of anything. Just love it. So, honestly, I was really offended by Zelensky's behavior yesterday. And I feel like I have some authority saying that since I've not ever voted for Trump and don't particularly care for him. I probably would have voted for him this time if I was forced to vote, but my distaste for him just didn't allow me to do it. I don't want to have to explain to my daughter that I would vote for somebody that talks about ladies like he has in the past. So, I mean, we've given Ukraine a lot of money, and I've been okay with it until this point because I am obliged to allow Russia to spend through their military inventory with no real gain beyond, territory that was arguably theirs in the first place, and they've since lost. This has been a battle for years. It's like being surprised that they're fighting in Gaza, right? So, I'm okay helping out Ukraine, but I'm not okay with this idea of having NATO have to go in there. And I don't see how Ukraine is going to advance past where they're at without some additional military intervention, which I don't think any reasonable person would sign up for.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark,
Really
I want to
interesting. Go
pipe in
ahead.
here for a
Yeah,
second.
go
if
ahead,
you don't mind.
please.
Because, obviously this is what's so great about two ways. We kind of get these real people and the real conversations, but I like to point out when it kind of intersects with some of the actual quantitative research we did. And I mentioned I don't like the concept of the 80-20, even though there are a couple 80-20 issues, or at least 70-30 issues. But I thought the most interesting thing about the research was the support, generally speaking, I mean, obviously comparatively to Russia and Putin, that America and registered voters have for Zelensky and Ukraine, but also kind of the reaction to this event, this what happened in the Oval Office. And I think that we've heard a lot of interesting things, but what Eric just said, I think is represents what I think is the most interesting thing that I would love to, if I had all the time and money in the world, I'd dive into that is what he's talking about. And then that group of people that, seemingly still do, they're not Trump supporters and certainly not Russia supporters. They don't dislike Zelensky, but, you know, we're seeing a moment here where I believe that Trump and Vance are winning on the content. They're winning on the issue. Even if it's just a small amount of people.
Yeah.
And,
But David, I would say to a large extent, they got ahead of the parade. They didn't lead it. They
yeah,
recognized where public
that's it.
opinion was on this. Obviously, for MAGA, maybe they've moved some people, but Eric and Diane and Patty, thank you all for coming and appreciate all the points you made. Let's bring former governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, who is a keen student of, amongst other things, presidential photo ops. Governor, welcome in. Thanks for joining. Would love to hear what you thought about what happened yesterday and where your emphasis is.
Well, two quick points, and I'll hear from the great feedback. As a former mayor and governor and someone who's had to sit down in some tough meetings with Barack Obama as a governor and try to negotiate, there's two rules. One rule is that you respect whoever's the person holding that office. So when I was a mayor for 14 years, if a peer of mine came into my office or someone you were negotiating with, you were the one in charge of how long the meeting went. You facilitated that meeting. You set the rules for that meeting. That was well understood. And same as governor, when you decided the meeting was over, when the governor or mayor or president stand up, you stand up and get out. Total control of the meeting. When I met with Obama one time and had a very tough conversation, he cut me off. I lost. I didn't lose the debate, but he ended the debate and basically said, "I'm done," got up, and I didn't dare argue with him. It was his office. But there's also another rule. And the other rule is you're only debating with that person. No other person is involved. There might be other people in the office, but the conversation, if it's peer to peer, and by the way, when it's state to state, a governor with a president, governors consider themselves the head of state too. And you saw that with the governor of Maine, I guess. All the governors, Republican, we're heads of state. We think of ourselves not reporting to the president of the United States because they don't. Mayors feel the same way about meeting with governors. They do not feel they're reporting to the governor because they don't. They're their separate executive, and they have their own constituency and own services. That's the mindset of these elected officials. And I think Zelensky said, I'm representing a state, a nation. I'm the peer, but only a peer to the president. So the second rule is if someone else speaks up, it better be well planned. And at the same time, the dilemma is when someone else speaks up and you disagree with that other person, the dilemma is that person's boss, whether it be the lieutenant governor's boss or my mayor pro tem's boss or the vice president's boss. The dilemma, if there's an argument, me as governor, if my lieutenant governor got in an argument, would go, who am I going to defend? I'll have to defend my lieutenant governor no matter what, in most cases, or it's a total embarrassment. By the way, another rule is you don't do this on TV.
Yeah, Governor, those are all
never do it on TV.
Those are all spectacular points, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing them because they're spot on and super interesting. And I will point out that when you were the commander in chief of the North Carolina National Guard, there were no territory lost to the Virginia forces, the South Carolina forces. You protected your state with dignity, grace, and determination.
There were some close calls with Tennessee, but we kept it under the radar.
Yes, sir.
Can I mention one thing about Vance, the dynamic between Vance and Zelensky, which is actually the dynamic that matters here? you're right. Trump decided to intervene and get angry when he thought that Vance was being disrespected, and when he didn't like, and this again was the problem of speaking in a language you aren't fluent in, when he said, you have this big ocean, the big ocean won't necessarily won't protect you. We'll see how you feel when your ocean doesn't protect you. That's an uncontroversial argument. In other words, what he was saying was Russia's a bigger threat than you think it is because they have intercontinental like the ocean doesn't protect people the way it used to. And then Trump thought he was lecturing him and said, "Don't tell us how we're going to feel, right? Don't tell us how we're going to feel." But it was when Vance said what he said, and then Zelensky called him JD. He said something, da da da, JD. And then the minute that it happened, I was like, you know what? This is way too informal. Trump looks like he's an informal person, right? He'll talk to anybody. He'll say anything. He wants to be called Mr. Trump, right? He was on The Apprentice for 15 years being called Mr. Trump. Like that wasn't just a gimmick. I mean, it was a gimmick, but it was like part of his person. He keeps saying people call him Mr. Trump. They call him Mr. President. Zelensky called the Vice President of the United States JD. Now he's senior to the Vice President. He's the head of state. Vance isn't the head of state. It was too informal. And when Vance immediately afterwards said, "You're being disrespectful," what he said was, "You're being disrespectful to Trump. You're being disrespectful." That's what he said. But in fact, Zelensky was being disrespectful to Vance by talking to him as though by using his first name, which is an odd thing to do in a formal head of state
if it weren't on camera, it wouldn't be an odd thing.
Right. No. Fair enough. But right, that's what I'm saying. The whole thing was a catastrophe because, as the governor says, it was on camera. You don't have confrontations on camera. The ultimate feeling I had, and David, I don't know if this shows up anywhere, is it really was like watching a train. It was like watching a car accident if you were watching it live, as I was. And some people like that, and some people, it was one of the most unpleasant experiences I can remember having watching that. Is my impulse was to turn it off. I was finding it so nerve-wracking and upsetting. And then I thought, but I have to watch this. This is what I do for a living. Do you think that plays a role? I don't know that people, it's one thing to watch it on Survivor where people yell at each other on Survivor on The Real Housewives. But if it's like, you're talking about the war in Ukraine, you're talking about the head of state of Ukraine and the head of state of the United States, like, I don't want to see that. Like,
No, I mean, even as we were obviously doing a very rapid survey, this was
no,
trying to do this as quickly as possible. But I thought about that even as we designed it, and we're going to make sure that they have to watch all 10 minutes of this. And I feel the same way you did. It's kind of a little bit hard for me to watch. And so that does go in, and that's one of the nice things about the way we do the surveys is you have to watch it or you can't finish the survey. But I do think that most people had the same reaction. I mean, I think a lot of people had that reaction to it. And what I think is interesting is that people did not think, even though when you look at the data, like across the board, 1,000 respondents, they did not think that no one got a very negative reaction to how they handled themselves. So it's maybe been hard for the respondents to watch, but even, Zelensky, Trump, Vance, it was not like people thought any of them was egregious. So they did think after they watched the entire kind of 10, 11 minute, conflict that all of them, did behave pretty well, which was interesting to me.
We're over time. Governor, do you have a final comment you want to make?
I think the comment is you got to know the rules before you get in a room like that, especially on the camera. And I don't think the rules were clearly understood. And you've got to remember, they're all representing their constituency, including Zelensky. And I just thought the format was wrong. And I've been in some very tough meetings with NFL owners, for example, trying to negotiate. I know nothing war and peace, but some tough things. And, I made sure my chief of staff or my lieutenant governor would not speak. So there was only no confusion about where the message went.
Right.
And you stayed on message, because it puts everyone in an awkward position if you get derailed.
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a dynamic. It's a power dynamic too. The office is a power move by having the meeting in the office.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, all the points you made are excellent, including, you could argue just inappropriate for the vice president to speak, no matter what he said, to change the flow of the conversation, so it's not just the two heads of state.
It's even the seating arrangements. I've discussed the seating arrangements in the governor's office. Where do you put the seats of who are the important players, and are you side to side? In fact, one mentioned if they're eye to eye or next to each other, the two chairs next to each other means there's kind of equal peers.
Right.
And it changes when you're sitting on that couch. By the way, I've been on that couch with Obama. It's a very difficult couch to sit on, because if you sit too far back, it's like a couch. You almost have to sit forward. And you might even want to go back and look at the seating of how the people were sitting on that couch. The Secretary of State, by the way, was kind of sitting back the whole time and staying out of it.
Yeah.
But the couch is a very odd area to sit when the two lead participants are sitting in chairs. So even that is a dynamic and a power move.
Yep. And the acoustics in that room are strange too. It's a little hard to hear sometimes, even if you're close to someone. Governor, thank you. John, thank you. Thanks for everybody who asked questions, and a special thanks to David and his team at WIC who put this survey together so quickly. No one else in America has anything like it. And as David said, it's the technology and the aggressiveness that allowed them to field this and get it back so quickly, and to be able to share with all of you. It'll be in my Substack. It'll be linked from my X account in just a little bit. And you're welcome to, if you got questions about it, you're welcome to bring them Monday morning to the morning meeting, or to email them in and ask on social media, and David and I will do our best to respond. But the full survey will be available pretty soon. Thank you all again, particularly a pop-up on a Saturday. Very grateful to you, David. Thank you, John, Governor. We'll see you all soon, certainly by Monday morning, 9 a.m. for the morning meeting. Thanks, everybody.